Welcome to the Vault. I'm JJ Carrell. I have an incredible guest, somebody that has interviewed me twice, and I interviewed him for my documentary, What is Treason? There's about three people that I listen to whenever they write something or someone interviews them. I basically stop everything and I either watch or read it right there, or if it's a long form interview, I'll put it on my calendar. And these three men share something that I don't see anywhere else, right? So my first two men are Pat Buchanan. And Pat Buchanan now is older. I believe he's at his end of his life, if I'm not mistaken, because he is off the radar where he was in the public eye for decades. And I'm sure he's ending his time. The other one is Victor Davis Hanson, who I find to be very intelligent. And the third is Douglas Macgregor. And what all three of these men share for me, or draw me to them, is they're extremely intelligent. They have the ability to articulate their views to the masses, if you will. And thirdly, and I find this to be this is the greatest characteristic that stands out for them in my view, is they all have wisdom. And wisdom is what we pray for. We see it in the Old Testament, the New Testament. It's riddled. It's not riddled. It's laid out in the Bible many times, and people are praying for it. And I find it to be lost, and it has not been. It's that thing that we all crave and strive to have some form of wisdom. So that is the three men that I look at when something pops up. I watch and I listen to them, because not only is there intelligence, not only is there the ability to articulate, there's wisdom. And that is a rarity. It's a rarity back in the Old Testament, and it's a rarity today, because it's hard to come by. So with that said, I want to bring retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor into the vault, and we're just going to get right into a great discussion. Sir, thank you very much for coming in today.
Oh, thanks for the invitation, JJ.
Well, I meant that when I said in the introduction, there are very few men that possess wisdom, and I think you are one of them, and it's a rarity in today. And I don't have we have about an hour, and I know your time is tough. I know you're fighting a cold too. So I just want to dive in, but I want to start with a different question, maybe that you haven't been asked. Is I do I do value greatly wisdom, and you possess it. I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Do you know that you possess wisdom?
Well, I don't know. I guess you have to define wisdom. It's difficult to define, and I don't know whether I don't know whether or not I possess it in great quantity, but perhaps there's a certain unity at some point in a person's life where the combination of experience and many hours of study and thinking come together. And perhaps that's what's happened. I know that when I was younger, I was also dumber. There's no question about that.
I do. I think it is I think that's a great definition. It is a combination of experiences, and experiences, no matter how much we want to rush that, it's just time, right? You can't go through a career in the military. You can only read so many books so fast. You can only watch so many interviews. Time is just that. It's solid. There's no really manipulating it. And I know that I don't possess wisdom. I think I some days I feel as if I have some, but I know that, like when I interviewed you for What is Treason, I sat down with you for the first time. I'd watched you many, many times, and I sat down with you, and I tell this story to my wife when I came back from interviewing you, and she said, "How did it go?" And I said, "Well, it was humbling. It was a great interview because the man is extremely intelligent, but it's humbling to sit before a man that I know has greater intellect and a greater grasp of the world than I do. But that is time. You have several years on me, not many, but several years on me. And I believe that is what I aspire to be. I aspire to be able to speak on topics from experience, from knowledge and research to have some level of wisdom. And I think maybe the wisdom, I think sometimes people that have a lot of wisdom are so humble they don't realize it, or it sneaks up on them. Would that be you?
Well, you're flattering me beyond belief, and makes me feel uncomfortable, to be frank with you. But I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, I don't know if there is a sudden point when the light goes on and people identify you as knowing something special. I
Hmm.
have no idea. But one of the things that I discovered when I left the Army was that I could say a lot of things and do things that people were very anxious to hear and see. When I was in the Army, I found that my superiors were often uncomfortable with me uh, because I would speak truthfully and without a great deal of hesitation. And in the Army, that was not always welcome. Now, the soldiers loved it, and so did my subordinate officers in most cases. But I think inside any large bureaucratic structure, and I'm sure you had this experience when you
Hmm.
were in the Border Patrol, that you can only go so far. Too much truth is too difficult for the people in charge to swallow because they make the mistake of identifying themselves 100% with the organization. They don't
Hmm.
understand that they're part of something larger. Most of the generals think that the whole military structure exists to provide them with this position of lofty influence and power and prestige. That's not really true. They too, as much as any soldier on the battlefield, are part of the organization. I'm sure you've seen that in government. It's a big difference between someone who's along the border trying to perform his or her duties in the face of very difficult circumstances and someone who is far away in the Department of Homeland Security
Hmm.
or in the governor's mansion or in the White House. And people there tend to lose sight of the fact that they too are part of this larger security establishment, is what I call it, because we're all involved in the same thing. We're trying to guard the American people, guard the interests of our nation. So if you can keep that in mind as you go forward, you're much better off than you are if you get lost in your own universe, thinking that you're really somebody special, when in fact you're just one of many, many people who are trying to do what is right. And that's when you start to do the things that are wrong, when you're lost in that universe.
Did you feel freedom when you left the military? When you were able to speak a certain way? Did you feel that? Because I felt that at first and it was uncomfortable because I was looking for the guardrails and there were no guardrails. I was the guardrails.
Yeah, I think so to some extent, although as people who know me will tell you, I was never hesitant about saying what I thought if I thought it was right and accurate. That, again, that doesn't make you very popular.
No.
And people mistake frankness and honesty for arrogance
Hmm.
because how could you possibly say such a thing? Well, I thought it was the right thing to do, or I thought it was the right thing to say. What do you want me to do? I always think of Martin Luther, the great reformer,
Hmm.
who was sort of challenged by the Holy Roman Emperor, Carl V. We call him Charles V. His name was Carl, obviously. And he said, how do you manage to come here and make these statements? What makes you think you are right? I mean, it just went through a whole litany of the usual things that you hear when someone doesn't like what you're saying. And he looked at the emperor and he said, "Here I stand. I don't know what else to do." And that was always my model growing up. I was always shown the sort of example of Martin Luther having had the courage and the strength to say what was right. And I think we try to admire people like that, but let's be frank, the system doesn't. The
No.
system doesn't admire people like that. They're much happier with someone who's charming and happy and pleasant and is willing to go along with whatever the narrative is. We act like narratives are new. No, they've always been with us.
Hmm.
What's the narrative? Everything is just fine. We're doing really well. And our men and women could not be happier, and they are the most qualified I've ever had. And we are winning every day. I mean,
Oh
this is
God, I'm having flashbacks, sir. Because that's exact that you sit here and you say it, and I'm thinking in my brain, and I'm kind of like you, I to my own detriment. And I didn't play the game the way the game should have been played. However, I can still go back to a station along the border, and people would know who I am, and they would respect. And when I gave orders and said, "Hey, we got to do something," no one said, "Oh, he's never done it." Everyone's like, "Yeah, that guy's done it. He's been there." But I worked through 5 presidential administrations, multiple chiefs, and I did feel that. I felt that, hey, everything's fine. Everyone's so happy, and we're winning. And I'm looking around going, no one's happy. People are pissed off. They're resentful, and we're losing. Why do I have to act as if it's all okay? To my detriment, I know that my career stalled multiple times as I rose up the ranks, and it could have been faster. However, I don't believe the men that I was the superior over their supervisor would have the same respect for me. Did you feel that in your career?
oh, absolutely. I mean, the person that you cannot fool ultimately in the long run is the combat soldier. Now, this is the man that actually is on the line and is fighting. He's the person that you talk to and you instruct and you train and you lead. And if you turn to him and tell him nonsense, he'll
Mhm.
smell it out right away. I had a friend who was serving in Iraq. This is back in 2008, 2009. And he talked about his commander who would come in and say, "We are here to build a liberal democracy. And everything that you do every day works towards that goal. And you have to understand that whatever you do, it's going to have an impact. These people do appreciate it. They will they will live in a better country," and so forth and so on. Of course, all the soldiers. This man was a sergeant major, and somebody I'd known for many years, a good friend, and he looked at me and he said, "The average American soldier looks around in Iraq and says, this is complete nonsense. We're not going to change a damn thing here, and these people are not interested in anything we have to offer." And they're just playing along because we're here, and the moment you turn your back, it's over and forget it. Well, this is the problem we've had in our society, I think, for a very long time. We have enshrined myths, fiction, and then we have ordered everyone to worship at the altar of fiction. It doesn't matter if you vet people on their way into the United States or not. They're all great people. They're coming to make their contribution to the great society of which we are all part. We must embrace them and welcome them. Uh-huh. Okay, how's that worked out? Not very well. So I think this is a long-term problem, and it's hard for Americans to deal with it because on any given day, most Americans are comfortable with their
Mhm.
lives, and it's difficult for them to understand what's really happening far from them. Even though when we say far from them, it may be just down the street or the road, but since it hasn't affected them personally or their children or their husband or wife or brothers and sisters, they say, well, it's not really a problem, is it? Does it really matter to me? Probably not. And then all of a sudden it becomes so large. And this is what I liked about your book. You painted this picture of a metastasizing tumor that was growing and growing and growing to the point where no one could ignore it anymore. And I think we're there. I think we've reached that point where most Americans, I don't think all of them, but most Americans really understand that this open borders has been destructive and harmful to us as a nation. And that's why your book was so important. And people have not yet crossed the line to the point where they understand that someone like Mayorkas or the president in the White House and other members of the administration, people sitting on the Hill, actually betrayed the interests and the security of the American people. They sold us out. It's beginning to sink in, but I don't think we're completely there yet. But at least they figured out the metastasizing tumor is here, and you got to cut it out. If you don't, it will eventually destroy you.
Do you feel that America doesn't understand because they had not been in positions that you and I were in? I find this a question, and I'm very curious to hear your answer, because I have friends outside of law enforcement and military, as you do. There seems to be an apathy. There seems to be, and I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying it's a different worldview where when you have been in the trenches and you have been fighting and you've seen people get hurt, killed, you've seen their minds kind of go off the rails, if you will, suicides high in the Border Patrol. And so we were in this fight and we're seeing it firsthand, whereas the rest of America has not yet seen it or felt it to the extent that you and I did. Do you think that our former careers played a small role or a large role in us seeing things very differently than the average American?
There's no question about it. I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's very difficult for people to understand what you have experienced, what I have, what others have. I have a friend who served with me in the Army for many years. He left and he became a policeman in Chicago, which is
Oh,
not a very nice place to be a policeman, frankly. He's now pulled out of it. He's retired. And when you meet him, you discover that, like all of us, this is someone who believes in this construct called the United States of America. He believes in the
mhm,
body of law. He believes in the American people. He doesn't look at any particular minority group and identify that as the American people. He simply says, those of us who call ourselves Americans, we're Americans. We obey the law. We pay our taxes. We work hard. We provide for our families and so forth. And he's very frustrated because when he tries to explain how miserable life has become for a policeman today, people look at him like, what's your problem? What's the matter? And they
yes,
don't understand that if you take action to enforce the law, you are now at risk. The litigation is organized against you. You don't have the benefit of the doubt, and that won't work because one of the things I said to the soldiers when we went into Iraq in 1991, and we were the lead unit, the first to go in and hit the enemy. And they said, well, when do we know that we should shoot? And I said, well, you have to look to your officers. The officer opens fire, then you can open fire. Well, how do we know what we're shooting at? I said, well, even though others will tell you not to get too close, I will tell you don't open fire until you're absolutely certain what you're shooting at is not us, not an American, not an ally.
right.
And you have to have enough courage and guts to risk getting that close to make sure, because the last thing you want to do is kill one of our own. That's hard for Americans to understand. They don't understand that the world is uh, what's the best way to put it? It's nebulous. It's not all clean and clear. There is no stark line between black and white, red and green. That in fact you're dealing with ambiguity all the time. But you have to know, as a policeman or a soldier, that if you take action and you try to do your duty, that the people that brought you there, who led you there and command you, are not going to throw you under the bus. In other words, that you're going to give the soldier, the policeman, whoever it is, the benefit of the doubt. The
Yes,
same way we give people that provide first aid the benefit of the doubt. We don't say, well, they provided first aid, but the patient died, so now we're going to prosecute this man in court because he happened to be attending the patient when the patient died. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? He did all that he possibly could, but we don't look at it that way. We live in a universe now where the assumption is those of us who wear uniforms, whether we're in the police, the border patrol, the military, doesn't make any difference. We have some sort of sinister agenda, and that
mm,
therefore the society has to be protected from us. Now, admittedly, you and I all know there are always individuals out there who don't measure up, but they're usually anomalous. I can say with absolute confidence that 98% of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines that I've ever known had pure hearts and were absolutely devoted to the country and to their duty as soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines. I think that's true for most policemen. I don't know if I could say 98%. I don't have experience like that. But even the policemen that you think may be shady, and there are certainly some that fall into that category, you ask yourself, why is the man the way he is? And you begin to discover, well, he's in a thankless profession. He's being criticized, he's being attacked, he's under threat. If you're constantly threatening or attacking the police and the people that are there to enforce the law, should you be surprised when they don't enforce the law?
Yeah. You're absolutely correct because, and that's a great analogy. A first responder comes and helps you, paramedic, and you die, and your family sues, and like you didn't do enough. Well, wait a minute. How many? Then, if that happens over a period of say 5 years, every doctor, every first responder gets fired or sued. How many people are going to join that profession? Not many.
Exactly.
And you're seeing that now in law enforcement. And when people say there are some border patrol agents that are dirty and there's some police officers that are dirty and some, and I go, wait a minute, some is a very big term. It could be some in your brain 50%. My brain is less than a quarter of percent. And the we have been demonized. And that's why you're seeing an increase in the military recruitment. But that's why you didn't have any military recruitment when it was so down. I think it was 41,000 billets. You couldn't get hired border patrol. You couldn't hire police officers because nobody wants to do that job under those conditions. And you're absolutely right. If you don't feel as if you have top cover, then you will hesitate. And if you hesitate in our professions, then there's a better chance than not you're going to get injured or die. That's it.
Exactly.
That's the truth. Because we can't hesitate. We have to, our training just kicks in and you have to move, knowing, okay, my boss has got my back. And that's how I would like to just ask you before we continue, because I find this fascinating with men like you, and I would say men like me, because I think that when I look back, I don't like to pat myself on the back, but I think I was a good leader of men. And I know that from the fact that I would have waiting lists to get on my units. People would do everything they can. They would come up to me and tell me, here's my new resume within my job. I want to get on your unit. Please let me on your unit. Nobody's doing that if they hate you and think you're a horrible leader. How did you do it? How did My way, sir, was I gave ownership. And the way I gave ownership to the younger guys is I would say, you have this, your area of operation is Santa Barbara tonight to take down the coastal invasion. Here's your equipment, here's your men, I trust you, go. You set it up and you do it. Knowing here's your parameters, here's what I want done. I'm here, you need me, call me. And then the way that happened was they had ownership and they were like, my God, that guy trusts me. I'm not going to let him down. I know, and he's got my back. And that's how I was able to grow units, like 60-man unit that just took down El Chapo Guzman, Sinaloa drug cartel loads. And we were dominant. But I did that because I can't be everywhere. I had 175 miles of coast. So I was going everywhere, putting out fires. So I needed men to rise up from 3 years in and be a 15-year veteran. And the only way that I could do that was by giving a responsibility and then follow up with ownership. How did
Well,
you do it?
well, I think what you did was the right thing. The problem in the American military today is there's really not much incentive to do that. If something goes wrong, an accident, someone is injured, or there's a hint of mission failure, whatever the mission might be, it all falls upon the man in command immediately. There's none of this. As you say, I'm not going to be there. That's true.
Right.
In most cases, I served most of my career in so-called cavalry units. These were armored reconnaissance or air reconnaissance aviation. And it was very obvious that you were operating over an area that it would probably be 12 to 30 miles across and at least that much deep, if not deeper. And that you had 800 to 1,000 men under your command, and they would be dispersed because obviously they're there to sense what's happening, to find the enemy, report on the enemy, whether you're attacking or defending, whatever it happens to be. And I used to give a briefing to soldiers in the unit that I commanded, and I had this little GI Joe doll, and I would bring this thing out, and I would say, "Now let's find out whether or not this man belongs in our unit." In which I used to say, if you can't do better than this, you don't belong here. I would say, let's look at this thing, and of course, you press a button on the back of it, and it says, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir." I said, "Well, if this is the only thing this man can say, he's useless. What good
Right.
is he? So let's see if this is anatomically correct." And then I would pull off the head, which was of course plastic, and I'd say, "Yeah, no brain," and then drop the pants, and I would point and say, "Yeah, no balls,
Yeah.
no brain, no balls, forget it." You have got to be able to make decisions. You've got to be able to think on your feet, and you've got to tell
Mhm.
me the truth, whatever it is that you see out there. Not nonsense, not what you think, but only what you see. And I'm not going to be there all the time with you in order to help you do this. You've got to do it on your own. Now, not all units are like that. When you get into more line units, infantry, armor, they tend to operate in dense, what I call dense pack organizations, closer to each other. But we couldn't do that. It was just impossible. I don't think anybody should do that today on the modern battlefield. That's what you were essentially saying. I'm not going to be able to be there. You've got to act. This is the intent of the operation. This is what I want you to
Mhm.
try and achieve. It's up to you to do it. I'm not going to tell you how. You've seen plenty of examples of how to do something. But the truth is that even though that worked for me, it worked very, very well. I was very lucky because it would not take much for an accident to happen, and then suddenly
Yes.
everything stops and you are immediately hanged. That did not happen to me. But on the other hand, my superiors were very uncomfortable with that. They believed that in the soldier only does what the boss checks. Really? If that's true, you don't have an army.
No.
You don't have an organization that can fight. If the policeman only does what you tell him to do on the spot, what good is he? He's not going to do his job. That's not the way people at higher levels see it. They see everything as an opportunity for things to go wrong that will inhibit their advancement, that'll prevent
Yes.
them from getting to higher and higher levels. And so you play this game in the military, I think. It's a terrible game to play, but they do it, where if something does go wrong, you instantly blame it on an individual. You find someone that you can hold responsible and then crush them. See, I did my job. It was him, not me. He did it. And you crush them. And I saw a lot of evidence that senior officers like that. And the worse you treated your subordinates, in some cases, they say, "See, he understands. That's what has to be done. Everything comes first. The mission first." No, no, no. It's not mission first. It's me first. So you
Yeah.
crush everybody to get what you want done. Doesn't work in battle. Doesn't work in real warfare. But how often do we have real warfare? This brings something else to mind. You're talking about patrolling and up and down the border. We went through this in 2004. We started encountering these, what we called improvised explosive devices. All it is a mine, okay, a mine that can be command detonated or tripped in some fashion and blows up. We've had them for hundreds of years. They're not new. They've just gotten more lethal and in many cases more effective. Well, we decided that we had to conduct these things called presence patrols. What's a presence patrol? I asked. Well, it's where you go out and you show everyone that you're there, that you're in charge, and that you're there. I said, well, that's probably going to upset some people. You know, they don't really want foreigners in their neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood in North Philadelphia where if the Army or the Marine Corps had occupied us after 2 weeks, we probably would have shot at them. So, nobody wants people that don't belong there to be there. But that's neither here nor there. The bottom line is we ran these presence patrols. And then they started encountering mines. And so then the next question was, well, what routes do you take? Well, we take this route, we take this route. And it became obvious that as soon as you left the forward operating base, there was someone there with a cell phone that came, said, click, oh, they're coming. It looks like they're going to take route number 1. Oh, no, it's route number 2. So someone goes over to route number 2 where they have some mines, wait for you to come across, and bang, they blow you up. So I was talking at the time to a very highly placed individual, very close to the Secretary of Defense, and this individual said, what would you do about this? I said, well, it's very simple. You can solve this problem. Really? What would you do? I said, first, you mandate that every general officer in the theater go on a patrol once every 2 weeks, whether it's wheeled or dismounted, doesn't make any difference. And they go on that patrol as a member of the patrol without any extra security whatsoever. They just get into the vehicle and they drive, or they go for the walk with the soldiers. And he said, well, how does that help? I said, they'll stop the stupid patrols and you'll stop losing soldiers. That went nowhere. That just went nowhere. And so we continued this and continued this and continued. Then people say, well, we need to mow down 100 of these people as an object lesson. You get into these hate, what I call hate games. Well, we've got to teach them an object lesson. You hit one of us, kill 10,000 of them. Doesn't work very well. We're seeing that over in the Middle East right now. Every time the Israelis kill another 300 or 400 people in Gaza, does that endear Israel to the local population? Does it lead to a resolution of the conflict? Does it make the people that live in Gaza more obedient? The answer to all the aforementioned questions is no. So that's a bad move. But unfortunately, that's the most likely one. And that's the thing I think when you talk about the border. When I was down there visiting, and there were some really, really great people that I met. I can't, Pete Chambers, I think, was one of the best people I met. And it became very clear to me that if you really want to understand what the hell is going on down there, you got to get with the Border Patrol. You got to ride with them. You've got to go to one of the legal crossing points, by the way, and stand there for a day. Watch what happens. See what gets through and what doesn't. If you don't do those things, and you don't do them regularly, I'm not saying once and then you go back to your office, but I'm saying every so often. Maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's twice a month. I don't know what the regularity should look like. But I know this works, and things would change. People would do things differently, and there would be a different attitude above towards what's happening below. But that doesn't happen very often, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it's the same way probably in the military is you lead from afar. And there's no such thing as leading from afar. You have to lead from within and in front. And so let's segue to the border, because you went down there, I think it was 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. You talked to me about your time down there. And Pete Chambers is a wonderful man, a very great patriot. When I interviewed you, I think it was in July, you used a term that I had never heard before, honestly. And I don't know how I don't know how this term never was broached to me before, or I never thought of it this way. And you said to me, our government, at the time it was Joe Biden, but there's really no difference right now, that we have administrative deep state and judges, et cetera, et cetera. So our government and the global elites want to denationalize the United States of America. And I never heard that word denaturalize. Can you denationalize? Can you tell my audience what you meant when you said that to me?
The idea of denationalization really originates with Marx's socialism, which becomes communism. And that's the notion that whatever you are, whatever language you speak, whatever religion you follow, whatever your ethnicity may be, all of those things are artificial. They're not real. And therefore, they must be suppressed, or better yet, erased. And when the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia, they set out to denationalize Russia. Not just Russia, but the whole Tsarist Empire. Remember, the Tsarist Empire was enormous, and it had millions of people in it who were absolutely not Russian. So the idea was, we're going to suppress all those differences, ultimately erase them, and then we're going to build a new citizen. And the new citizen, after 2 or 3 generations of re-education, remember re-education,
Hmm.
and new socialization, is going to become the Soviet man. In other words, a new artificial construct called the Soviet
Hmm.
man, who is devoid of these trappings. So he'll never think of himself as anything other than, I'm just another Soviet man. I'm not a Russian, a Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, Kazakh, Mongol, Tartar, whatever. That will all be gone. And then once that is the case, we have peace, we have perfect harmony and utopia, because we are all demonstrably the same. Differences don't count. That's what communism originally set out to do. And the joke in the early 1990s in Moscow was, everybody looked around and said, well, as the Soviet Union fell apart, gosh, where are all the Soviet men? Where are all the Soviet women? It looks like all we have now are Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Finns. You know, in other words, nothing had fundamentally changed. But in order to make that work, what did they have to do? They had to set up vast concentration camps. We don't call them that. The Russians call it gulag. In other words, an administrative camp inside the Arctic Circle. They didn't need to gas anybody, because after a few weeks in the Arctic cold with bad food, very little sleep, most people die. So you just send them up there, you put them to work, and give them enough time, and 90% of the prison population will die. Solzhenitsyn is remembered and thought of today as a remarkable man because he survived. And he explains that the reason you had to create these vast concentration camps, and they had concentration camps in the early 1920s, long before anybody saw anything under Hitler. No one thought of anything like this. It was because communism didn't work. In
Hmm.
other words, your efforts to denationalize people did not work. People feel identity. Human identity is important to the individual human being. It becomes important to the collective. It's a matter of shared experiences, shared attitudes, shared language, shared experience. All of that goes into making a national identity. Well, the people that came to power under the Biden administration were inspired by the Bolshevik model, to be blunt. And so, how do you destroy national identity inside the United States? You flood it with millions of people who are not Americans, are not
Hmm.
interested in being Americans, who don't even speak your language, may not even know how to read or write, and are fundamentally alien to the society. Now, this didn't just begin under Biden. This has a long history. It
Hmm.
really started under Obama, because Obama was an advocate for this. That, you erase these differences, then we all become the same. And if you can go even further into the distance and find people in the 60s and the 70s talking about it, but we
Hmm.
really saw it operationalized under the Biden administration. They figured out, if we can bring in 50 million, then what happens? Then suddenly people no longer are what they thought they were. Lyndon Johnson used to say, if I can't find enough votes for the Democrats in this country, I'll find them overseas and bring them here. What does that tell you? It's the same concept. And
Hmm.
who are these people going to be loyal to? You saw what was happening on the border, handing out cell phones, handing out phony social security numbers, instructing people how to circumvent federal law,
Hmm.
instructing them how to penetrate our society and disappear. And dozens, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of judges all over the country that were complicit in the operation,
Hmm.
ensuring that these people would never be found once they entered. They would have some court date in the distant future, and whether or not they ever showed up made no difference, because there was no expectation they would. The objective was just to open the borders, open the floodgates. Now, we've been through some of this on a smaller scale before, but never on the scale that we saw under the Biden administration. Now, the question is, Can we survive this? And you have two camps. One camp says, well, everybody ultimately becomes an American in time. Well, I don't think that's true. I've got lots of friends who are from other places, and they make that abundantly clear. You don't become an American unless you really want to be an American, unless it's an aspiration. This is not the case, as we know, with tens of millions of these so-called illegals. There's another term I use, and I don't know if you've heard it before. We used it in the military: illegal border crosser, IBC. Now, I like that term because that means if you cross that border, you're illegal. You broke the law. And so we were always looking for IBCs when I was standing on the Czechoslovak or East German borders. We were looking for IBCs, and they would be picked up immediately if they came across. We would find out what they were up to, who they were, whether or not they were coming in with criminal intent, or in those days, simply trying to escape the society in which they lived. We need to start realizing that illegal border crosser is the right term. Calling somebody a migrant suggests that, oh, well, they didn't have enough food last week and they're running out of water, so they just came north for food and water. What's wrong with that? No, they're illegal border crossers. And we're beginning to understand something that you made very, very clear in your work. If you have no border, you have no civilization, you have no culture, you have no identity. That's the idea. We're now struggling with this. And all you have to do is challenge some of these people that want open borders. They say, well, what's an American? What makes you an American? What makes you an American? He's an American too. In other words, anybody can show up on any given day and say, hey, I'm here. I'm reporting I'm an American. That's how you destroy society. It's being done in Europe. Anybody who shows up, oh, he can be a German. He can be a Frenchman. He can be British. He can be anything. And people have finally wakened up and are beginning to say, no, it doesn't work that way. Well, this is the 11th hour. And that's why your work is so important, because you're telling us this is the 11th hour. If we do not attack this problem and rectify it, we're out of business.
The 11th hour analogy is right on, spot on, because when I go into this discussion about the border, I'd say, okay, Donald Trump did the very first thing that had to be done. If your house is underwater, meaning you have a main break and your basement's flooded, you don't begin trying to get the water out. You have to stop the flooding. Once you stop the flooding, which he did, is closing the border at 97, 98%, and everyone that's being arrested is being released. That is the first part of a two-part problem. And the second part is even harder. I think closing the border is simple. It's easy. Donald Trump showed he did it within 24 hours. Now the difficult part comes, the most important part, is the 50 million illegal aliens that are living inside of our country right now. And you're right. Terms, words have meanings. They're not migrants. Migrants are legal people coming across, migrating legally. We're not talking about migrants. We're talking about illegal aliens. When you layer the 50 million with the birth rates that are 2 to 5 times the rate of our women, 2 to 5 times, we're looking at a generation or two that the American, the citizen, becomes the minority in our country. I believe if Donald Trump does not accelerate the arrest and deportations to a level of 10 to 15,000 people a day, the left will win. That's the thing I don't think anybody understands, and I would like to get your feedback on this. The left successfully brought the bomb into America. They've ignited it, meaning they brought 50 million people in. They've ignited it because no one can get them out. And that was their major coup d'etat, was I'm going to change the demographics of America. I'm going to make American citizen meaningless. It could be anybody, the Soviet man, now it's the American man. I still put money on Donald Trump. I still put money on Tom Homan, Kristi Noem. However, I think we're losing this fight because the clock's ticking, sir. And we're fighting the clock, and we're fighting the media, we're fighting the left, and we're fighting the criminals in America. Do you agree with that analogy or that thought process, or am I off on some way?
No, I agree with you. The other problem is that we still haven't stopped the influx of drugs.
Hmm.
They're still finding their way in. They're finding other ways to get around the border. And, we've discussed the problems at legal crossing points.
Hmm.
That's why for many, many years, this goes back to 2010, 2011, I kept arguing to put the border, at least temporarily, under military control. And I keep trying to get people to understand there was a reason we kept most of the United States Army in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Southern California. We had all the cavalry regiments down there, along with many infantry battalions. All the
Hmm.
generals that fought and led us through World War II had all served on the Mexican border. They wore decorations, Mexican campaign decorations for their service on the border. There was a reason for that. It was important. We understood that Mexico was not the United States. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean Mexico is bad, but it's not our country. They have completely different norms and expectations in that country from our own. And we had to stop the illegal border crossers because much of it had to do with what we're dealing with now, various forms of organized crime.
Hmm.
Now, everyone has turned this on its head and acts as though if you bring the military into this equation, that's somehow or another inhumane. We need to go back and look at what happened in the past. After the stock market fell in 29, Herbert Hoover sat down, consulted with his cabinet, and everyone agreed that it was time to expel illegals from the United States, particularly in the Southwest. Why? Because they were doing jobs that Americans would now do. You've heard this expression, oh,
Hmm.
Americans job, so why not let them do it? Well, they found out Americans would do the job when they had
Hmm.
no choice and they had to make money for their families. So he deported 9 million Mexicans. FDR deported 3.5 million. Truman deported over 2 million. Eisenhower deported about 1.5 million. Now, why? Is it because we didn't like them? No. It was for the reason that I just pointed out. And remember, after World War II, we had tough times economically. We were dealing with enormous debt that was a holdover from the Second World War. Fortunately, we had high human capital in the workforce. We still had a big manufacturing base, but it still was tough. Eisenhower kept all the spending under control. In particular, he kept spending on defense under control and on social, what I would call social matters. The bottom line is we have to get back to that. We have to understand that. And that means that you have to have a plan. I listen to Tom Homan. I met Tom Homan. I love Tom Homan. He's a great person. He's absolutely honest and he's totally sincere. Where's the plan, JJ? I want to see
There
the
isn't.
plan.
I want to see it
Where's the
too.
strategy? Where's the strategy? Where do we go first? I'm happy to hear, oh, we rounded up Venezuelan gang members here. We rounded up, El Salvadoran gang members here. That's fine. But that's not a plan. That's not a strategy. These are flashpoints, and everybody wants to step forward. I think the Trump administration is too fixated on wins that they can present to the American public. See, we're winning. We're doing this. See, we're winning. We're doing that. The American public is not stupid. Eventually, you're going to figure out, well, wait a minute. How many is that? How many people are
Hmm.
we dealing with right now? And when you realize you're talking about 50 million, 30 million came over, we think,
Hmm.
under Biden.
Correct.
You're talking about 50 million illegals. Now you have to make some decisions. I agree with this. First of all, I argued strongly before the election. You need to give everybody who is here illegally 120 days to get out
Hmm.
and tell them if you register with us on the way out and you've committed no crimes, your record is clean, then we'll put you on a list and consider you for possible re-entry in the future.
Hmm.
But if you're here after 120 days and you have not voluntarily left, as far as we are concerned, you are a criminal. End of discussion. You are going to be treated as a criminal. But in order to do that, you must first absolutely shut down the border.
Hmm.
100%. I'm very happy that the obvious illegal border crossers that come across in Kinney County or somewhere else are being picked up. I'm worried about the people that are sneaking in other ways, and particularly through the legal ports of entry. It all has to stop, and there can be no compromise. We're not there yet. Americans are not there yet. They don't understand that someone that comes into the country with tons of fentanyl is someone who should be executed. Oh, execute him for that? Yes. How many human lives does he destroy? How many families does he destroy? How many people are killed because of the drugs he brings in? He's a mass murderer. You should immediately identify him. He's convicted and executed. Until we do these things, we're not going to make a big dent. And the other problem is this: we have to understand that when we do clamp down and shut it off, the war with the drug cartels, which is ongoing as it is going to really spill into the open. And we're going to discover we have drug gangs all over the country. That's a war we have to fight and win. If we don't fight that war and win it, and then ultimately destroy the cartels that are operating in Mexico, we're not going to make it as a nation.
I'm glad you brought that point up, and I'm glad you stated it so bluntly, because I believe this. And people say, well, that you're an absolutist. And I go, yes, because we're in a war for the soul of America. We're in a war with our own government, with the Mexican government and the cartels. And you're right. The cartels, the old days, sir, was maybe the old days, maybe 10 years ago. The cartels would bring the drugs over to America. Then the white biker gangs and the Latin kings or whoever would come, get the narcotics, and they would be the distributors. Now, the narco smugglers cut all that out. They own everything. They're in every state of our nation. They're the Amazon. Amazon for a while there was subbing out a lot of their stuff. People were driving weird cars with no Amazon markings. Now Amazon owns everything. The cartels are doing the same thing that Amazon did. Cartels figured out we have waste, fraud, and abuse by subcontracting. No more. We're going to have complete control of everything and where our products go. So you were right. When that border gets locked down, will it get locked down completely? I don't know, sir, because I don't know if we're all in. I really don't. All in is going to the ports of entry, putting the military there, multiple checkpoints, no corruption. As you stated, rotate battalions in and out of so there's no time to get corrupted, if you will, because the money's so great. But once we clamp down, this is a $1 trillion business. This is not billions of dollars. This is trillions through narcotic and human smuggling. They're not going to stop. They're going to go to war. And when that spills over in America, I believe America has no concept of what is facing them. And I believe it's going to be a massive wake-up call to America.
No, I agree with you. And I've actually said publicly that I think the president should go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war on the cartels so that we can mobilize the necessary assets. It becomes a national issue, which is what it has to be. People that are in Overland, Kansas cannot be allowed to ignore what's happening. No. They're part of it. They have to be in on it. That's something we need to do, but it hasn't happened yet. Maybe it will happen down the line. I don't know. But the longer it takes, the more dangerous the situation becomes, as you point out. And I always tell people what happened when Pancho Villa's 2,000-man force crossed into Arizona and attacked. Only a few people were killed. Only a few, 11, 12, 16. And I always tell people that the town they attacked in Arizona had a few soldiers in it, but most of the troops were gone. And that's one of the reasons that Pancho Villa attacked. He was trying to get access to the arsenal there so he could equip more of his men. And in addition to the soldiers who came out to shoot, the town's population came out with weapons right next to the American soldiers, and they shot and killed many of these Mexican quote unquote bandidos. What was the response? Woodrow Wilson mobilized the entire National Guard and put 100,000 National Guardsmen on the border. And these were not National Guardsmen like the ones we talk about today, who are not allowed to shoot. who are not allowed to take any action. They were allowed to shoot and kill anybody that tried to come across that border illegally. And at the same time, he took 25 to 30,000 regular army troops into Mexico. Now, everybody says, well, it was a failure. They didn't capture Pancho Villa. It wasn't just capturing Pancho Villa. The whole idea was to push the criminality and the chaos back into Mexico, away from the U.S. border. That's what we did then. And there was no question in anybody's mind about who was an American. We knew we were Americans, and we knew the people doing this to us were not. We've got to reawaken this if we can do it. And I think Donald Trump is somebody who could do that. There's no question in my mind. But we're dithering because we're wasting our time, money, and resources in places like Ukraine and the Middle East, and losing sleep over Taiwan. Taiwan is an island off the coast of China. In my judgment, that's a Chinese issue, a Japanese issue. It's not our issue. I don't particularly care who governs in Taiwan. Why are we so concerned about that? Doesn't make any sense. But you have these phony threat pictures that are developed that create the illusion that we're under threat from everyone beyond our borders. We're not. The real threat, as you pointed out in your book, is right here.
Yes.
That's
You're absolutely correct. I'm so tired of protecting other nations' borders when our border is wide open, and the greatest threat is always the nearest. That's the greatest threat, is the nearest threat. My last question for you, sir, because I only have like 2 minutes left for your time. If you were president, or became the narco cartel czar, for a lack of a better term, how would you go attack the cartels, with the caveat that, and you know this better than most, or better than everybody, the cartels are not some guys that have, the bullets around their vests and they're banditos. No, these are highly trained. They are highly equipped with our weapons. So what is if I gave you, said, sir, I'm Donald Trump, you are in charge of this, and I want it done, and I want them defeated yesterday, what do you do?
number one, and most important, is the border has to be closed to the criminality. You've got to go in and take control of that border. You've got to put the military on the border, because we know that once you shut this down, we're going to be attacked. So you have to have the military present on the border to protect the country. We need, I would say, a 3 to 5 mile zone stretching from the border into the United States, which is federalized. In other words, in that zone, federal law is supreme. None of this nonsense about you can't do X, Y, and Z. I'm the governor of Arizona, and that's part of me. Forget it. If you're within 3 to 5 miles of the border, you're going to be under federal protection, and we are going to guarantee that anybody who comes into that zone illegally is arrested. So that has to happen. Once that happens, you're going to begin having the fight inside the country. And inside the country, if you're going to clean out the drug problems in many of these cities, it's not just cities, by the way, we have them in rural areas as well. That's going to take a combination of police power and some military power. The police are overwhelmed in many cases. They don't even go into certain areas anymore. That has to stop. So you're going to have areas that come under what I would call the Insurrection Act, areas that really need martial law for a period of time to root out and eliminate the problems. At the same time, when we talk about securing that border, we have to use the technologies that are on hand. We have something that was out many years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago, called J-Lens. It was an aerostat that had a satellite surrogate package on it that could either be tethered to a fiber optic cable or could be operated automatically at 10,000 feet, that could look into Mexico for 300 kilometers, see everything, hear everything, track everything. That's part of theater missile defense. And theater missile defense is important for our country. So you're talking about investing in a dual capability, the ability to protect your borders, protect your coastlines, but also to protect us at some point, at least on a point-by-point basis, from missile attack. Those things need to be done. And then you have to be prepared to go in as surgically as possible, destroy what you find, but you've got to follow that up with ground forces. In other words, go in, strike hard, annihilate the target, whatever it is, whether it's a manufacturing facility or a drug cartel headquarters. Go in on the ground after the strikes go in, make sure it's dead and annihilate it, and then come back out again. What you don't want to do under any circumstances is occupy anything in Mexico. You do those things that I just outlined, and in 6 months, the world will change for us in the Caribbean and Mexico. And the Mexican people will ultimately benefit enormously from this because they're the ones that have to live with the criminality. As I tell people, I have a son that was just down there, loves Mexico, speaks Spanish, and he said everybody in Mexico City, in this race, everybody knows where not to go, JJ, what airport not to use, what not to do. I mean, everybody knows this is cartel territory. You go in there, they govern, they run it, it's their show. Don't go there. And everybody acts as though, well, how could we possibly know that? Everybody in Mexico knows the score.
Yeah.
But we don't want to occupy anything. That's a waste of time, money, and resources. We should have learned that in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the places we've been. Occupations turn soldiers into jailers. But we have to be prepared to target the cancer and cut it out and then leave. And that's it. And none of this nonsense, well, we'll compensate you for whatever the damage is that was done. Nonsense. You let this cancer grow inside your society. We'll cut it out, then you deal with it. That's what we've got to do. There's no alternative to it. I think eventually someone somewhere will come to terms with this and we'll do it. I wish we'd stop talking about wars with people thousands of miles away that we don't need to fight in areas where we don't even have a real, tangible, concrete national interest, and start looking at our vital national strategic interest on our border in Latin America, in the Caribbean basin. That's where we should be focused. And by the way, I don't want to act as though everything is honky-dory in Canada. But the good news is the Canadians do work well with us. And we can do a lot, especially around the Great Lakes and where Washington borders Canada, because we know a lot is going on there that is not good. But let's face it, the big damaging existential threat is definitely in Mexico. And it's not the Mexican people. That's not my point. So anybody out there says, well, Macgregor must hate Mexicans. That's nonsense. It's a threat to us that we have to deal with. And we have to deal with it as directly and forcefully as necessary to protect ourselves. But these things have to be done in stages. First, the border, then the federal zone, the surveillance, then inside the country, selectively going in and dealing with the criminals that are killing our society, and simultaneously building out a plan to deal with it south of the border. Those things have to be done, not overnight, not in a week, but over many months. But we start first and foremost right on that border.
Couldn't agree more. Sir, thank you for giving me an hour of your time and your wisdom. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next time that we can speak together.
Well, I look forward to reading your next book. I hope you'll send me a copy.
I absolutely will. I'll mail it out today, sir. Thank you very much. Have a
Thanks
great
a
day,
million,
and I hope
Jim.
you feel better. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Colonel Macgregor. Just wisdom, intelligence, the ability to articulate, and incredible, incredible wisdom. That's it for the vault. On to the next one, but pass this along. Tell people about it. What Colonel Macgregor has said throughout that hour is 100% factually true. Thank you.